right. If you have your Bible, open them up to Romans chapter 12. Romans chapter 12 is where we're going to be today. And a couple things before we get there. T-shirt message today is no one can do everything, but everyone can do something. And we'll talk about that a little more as we get into it. When you guys got in here, there was one of these on your seat as you came in. I just want to explain those real quickly. The reason why these are here are not decoration. We really want you to fill it out, and we want you to serve somewhere. And so you don't have to do it now. You can wait into service, something like that. Just don't do it during the prayer because that's not a good thing. Lightning and fire happen when people do that. But you can fill it out on this side, and then we want you to check one or two boxes of something that you're interested in serving in. And these will start in the summer or the fall, so you're not committing to anything. Like it's not like, well, I was going to be out of town next Sunday, so I can't. Summer or the fall is when we're looking at it. And then when you fill those out, we just ask if you'll drop them in the Tom boxes on the way out. But this is what I want to do today. I want to talk about, not personally, not my reasons, but out of Romans chapter 12 as to why I think serving is maybe one of the best and most important decisions you can possibly make. Okay, so I'm not going to refer back to this. You understand it. It's not complicated. Fill it out, drop in Tom. But I want to talk through Romans 12 as to why Paul says this is so important. So Romans 12, it's the book of Romans is written by the Apostle Paul. He's writing this letter to the church in Rome. And what usually happens in this section is we usually just cover very small amounts. And the reason why is because Paul, when he writes, is just really confusing. And he's confusing for two different reasons. The first reason is because Paul connects ideas that we don't think are connected. And so what he does is he goes on just kind of this stream of thought, and he goes, I'm going to talk about this, I'm going to talk about this, and I'm going to talk about this. But to him, there's a central theme that is kind of pulling all these together. For us, we don't always understand that theme, and so we take it in very small chunks, and we never get the big idea that Paul's really talking about. It's like the equivalent of sometimes, it's not nearly as bad anymore, but I can remember when me and my wife Bethany were dating, we'd be like driving along in the car, and we'd be talking about movies, and then all of a sudden she'd just be like the next second, she'd be like, I want to go to the beach. What? Like, squirrel? Okay, what are we going through here? And she's like, I want to go to the beach. And then I was like, where? And she's like, well, when you were talking about movies, I thought about the movie Beaches, which made me think of a beach, which made me think I really want to go to the beach. And I'm like, yeah, I should have put that together. That makes sense. Since then, this has been extremely helpful for both of our sanities. She traces the thought back. She goes, I'm going to say something that seems unrelated, but it's because I thought of this and this and this. And that's kind of what Paul does here, is he goes through these different ideas, and you're kind of following along, and you're just like, what? Why are we talking about this now? But to Paul, all of these are connected. The second reason why Paul's really confusing when he writes is because he puts things out of order. So in the text that we're going to discuss today, he gives us a big idea, he gives us an application, and then he tells us two things that are at stake with that big idea and application. If it was me ordering this, this is how I usually do it. I tell you, this is what's at stake, this is why you should care, and then I give you the idea, and then I tell you what to do with it. Paul flips the whole order around, so that's why it gets a little confusing. So I'm going to take it based upon his order today, and so we're going to cover, okay, here's the idea, this is the thing that you need to know, this is what you do with it, and then he's going to give us two different ways in terms of showing us what's at stake when we do that. Does that make sense? Okay, so we're going to cover an idea, we're going to talk about what you do with it, and then two things that are at stake when you actually go through it. So with that said, Romans chapter 12. And he starts with this, therefore. Now what happens right before this? I know you're going, oh my goodness, we're one word in, and we're covering Romans 12, and we're already stopping to discuss. What happens right before it is this section of Scripture referred to as the doxology, which we actually covered a couple weeks ago, and we said the sum up of this is God is great, God is good. And so as he's getting into this context, he's assuming that we're all on the same page in terms of understanding that God is acting in our behalf and he is powerful enough to do whatever he wants to do. So this is a good thing. God is great, God is good. So he says, therefore, I urge you, brothers, in view of God's mercy, to offer your bodies as living sacrifices, holy and pleasing to God. This is your spiritual act of worship. Do not conform any longer to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. then you will be able to test and approve what God's will is, his good, pleasing, and perfect will. He talks about a lot of things in this section. He talks about having your mind being renewed. He talks about being transformed. And he talks about knowing God's will. But the central idea of these first two verses is living sacrifices. This is what it all starts with, is that you would be a living sacrifice. And the way that your mind is renewed, the way that you're transformed, and the way that you know God's will is if you are a living sacrifice. Now, in their culture, how it worked is when you had a sin, you had something that you had done wrong, what you would do is you would take an animal, some type of animal that was kind of the instructions were giving to you. You would take it to the altar. You would kill the animal. And the belief was that in that sacrifice, it was giving you life. Because the animal had been sacrificed for your sin, you no longer had to pay the penalty for your sin. And so right immediately when you think of this idea of sacrifices, you need to understand this connection, that sacrifices bring life. If there aren't sacrifices, there was no life. There was only death. And so even though the thing died, sacrifices bring life. Now we've got this really odd thing that he says, I want you to be a living sacrifice. But the only way that sacrifices are good if they're dead. So I'm to be a living sacrifice, but by its very nature, I'm not going to be effective because I'm still alive. And that's part of the dilemma in there. And that's the fact that, you know what? While there is a part of you that is alive, and this is what he will refer to later on, is your will, your this is about me, it's all focused on what I want and what I have, then you're not going to be effective. You're not going to do what you're supposed to do. It's kind of the tendency that we all have to kind of grasp onto the things in our life and say, this is mine, this is mine. And Paul's going, no, as long as you're here and going, this is mine, you're not going to be a living sacrifice. When you empty your hands of it and say it's yours, that's when you can be a living sacrifice. And so he says, I want you to be a living sacrifice. I want you, get this, in how you live, because you are alive, that you will bring life. Have you ever been with somebody or known with someone that when they walk into a room, they just basically sucked all the life out of the room? Yeah, don't nudge your neighbor if it's the person next to you or something like that, because that'll just get you in trouble. But it's kind of like they walk into a room and it's just like everything kind of got tense and awkward and the jokes weren't as funny anymore, and it's just because that's what they do. Now, he's not referring to this in terms of like, I want you to have a bubbly, goofy personality, which if you do, that's great because I like that. But I mean, that's not what he's pointing to. He's saying, I want you, when you come on the scene, I want people to think life. And he's going to tell us in just a second how you do that, but there's a problem to living sacrifices, and this isn't my thinking. This has been said for a long time. And the problem with living sacrifices is living sacrifices keep trying to crawl off the altar. Right? I don't know how many times I feel confident that you've done this, because I know I have done this many times in my life, that I'll pray a prayer that goes something like this. God, whatever your will is, just not quite yet. Like, whatever you want to do, Lord, just give me a little bit. I had a friend in high school who really thought that God was calling him to be a missionary. And I prayed with him, and this is what he prayed. Like, okay, these are the words out of his mouth to our God who died for his sins. Lord, I will go wherever you want me to go. Just please not outside the United States. That's not that bold of a prayer, but you could even shorten it a bit, like, not Alaska, Hawaii, continental 48, God. That's what I'm looking for. Keep me in the continental 48. But that's what we struggle with. I can remember as a kid growing up, I swear we closed at least 30% of our services with the song, I Surrender All. And we'd sing that, and I'd be like, how about some? Like, I know it doesn't sound as nice, but could we sing, I surrender these things, but I'll hold on to these? And that's the trouble. And so he's saying right here in this moment that I want you, if you're going to have your mind renewed, if you're going to be transformed, and if you're going to know God's will, you need to be a living sacrifice. The way that you live needs to bring life. And then he's immediately going to tell us he's going to tell us in a little bit how you do that, but he immediately tells us there's an obstacle that is going to get in your way. And so this is what he says in verse 3. He says, "For by the grace given me, I say to every one of you, do not think of yourself more highly than you ought, but rather think of yourself with sober judgment in accordance with the measure of faith God has given you." And so he says right here, here's the deal. This is the thing that is going to get in your way from being a living sacrifice. Your ego and your pride. Don't think of yourself more highly than you ought. And so he's saying you're going to want to do this, but continually, over and over again, your ego and your pride are just going to kind of be an obstacle right in that way to you being a living sacrifice. Now, this is what I have never heard. I've never heard someone go, you know what? I mean, I really feel like God could use me if I wasn't just such an arrogant little punk. Right? Like, I've never heard that in confession. I really feel like God would use me if I wasn't so stinking full of myself. We don't say that. This is what I hear us say far more often is it comes along these lines. It's, I don't have time for that. I would do that, but I don't have time for that. I think that's where we end up most of the time, and I get it. We're busy people. I'm a busy person as well. But that's where it really manifests itself. I found that for myself, my tendency to be selfish about my time comes when I have already misused my time. Does that make sense? Like if I've been extremely productive and gotten lots done and I come home and my wife is like, hey, will you change the light bulb? Which she never asked me for more than that because she understands that's about the extent of my home repair abilities. Like if it's beyond light bulb, we're calling somebody. That's how it works. But she's like, hey, I want you to change the light bulb. Like if I've been extremely productive that day, I'm like, okay. If I haven't, if I've just squandered and wasted my time, hey, will you do this? Do you have any idea how busy I am? And then I like sit down and scroll on Facebook for 10 minutes. I just need a break. That's what I need. And that's for me, that's whenever I have acted in selfish ways, my tendency is to continually be more selfish. When I have acted in sacrificial, service-oriented ways, my tendency is to continue that. And so he says, you should not think of yourself more highly than you ought. So you're going to want to be a living sacrifice, but you're going to continually come up against this obstacle over and over again. And then he does this thing that's amazing. So we've got this idea of living sacrifices, which is such a hard thing to kind of thumb down and say, this is actually what it is, or this is how you do it. And then Paul tells us how you do it. Paul actually says, this is how you become a living sacrifice. Your tendency is to want to continually pull your life back and pull your will back, and in the sacrifice system, take them off the altar and claim them as your own. And he said, this is how you keep them there. This is what you do. So he says this in verse 4. It says, just as each of us has one body with many members, and these members do not all have the same function, so in Christ we who are many form one body, and each member belongs to all the others. So Paul right here, he's describing the church and the nature of the church and what happens when we come together as followers of Christ. And the metaphor that he picks to describe us is the human body. And I look at that and I'm just like, bad decision. Bad decision, Paul. Let me tell you why. First off, our bodies don't always function how they should, right? I mean, my body does not function always how I expect it to or want it to. I can remember when I was growing up, my youth pastor used to always tell me, when you turn 30, your body changes. Like, you just get old. And I'm like 12 at the time. I don't believe it. You're a liar. It's not true. I'm going to feel like this forever. And so a couple of weeks ago, I played basketball three times during the week. And my muscles weren't sore. I hadn't hurt anything. But my bones hurt. Like, it was the most ridiculous thing ever. And so I got home one night, and I asked Bethany, I was like, Bethany, I feel like such a baby, but will you rub my leg? And she's like, why? Did you hurt it? I was like, no, the bones hurt. And she's like, your bones hurt? I'm like, yeah, the bones in my leg. Will you rub them? Because they really hurt. And she's like, no. I'm like, okay. But first of all, we get that. Like, so he goes, hey, we're one body. And like, my body doesn't always do what it should. The other thing, and I'm sure you've heard someone say this, someone say something along the lines of, oh, I just hate my hair. I hate my nose. I don't like this part of my body. Now, I mean, I'm not going to take that to the full extent, but I mean, we can love our body, but hate parts of our body. Now, we're not going to go through here this morning and figure out which of the part of the body is that we are not big fans of as a whole. I don't think that would be constructive at all. But we can understand that, you know what, even though we're one body, there can be parts of our body that we don't like nearly as much of others. And so he says, first off, he says, hey, this idea, the thing that I want you to think of when we come together is we're one body. As a pastor who I really like said it years ago, he said, I think we're always trying to figure out who is what part of the body. Like, who's the arm? Who's the heart? Who's the lungs? Who's the spleen that no one really knows what they do, but any moment they could burst and kill all of us? Like, again, we're not going to try to figure out who's the spleen this morning. But he says we're one body, and then he says, and each member belongs to all the others. This is important. Each member belongs to all the others. I go to walk, my brain says, let's go. And my calf doesn't go, whoa, hold on. Like, below the knee, we didn't get a say in this. No, the brain says, let's go. And so the legs go with it. In the same way, a couple weeks ago, I sprained my ankle. And I was manly about it. Kept going. But throughout the day, I was like trying to walk on it and not hurt it. And by the end of the day, my knee was killing me. Because when my ankle wasn't functioning as it should, it put unnecessary strain and stress on my knee. You get it? And so when certain parts of the body are not functioning as they should, what happens is it puts unnecessary stress and strain on other parts of our body. And he says, this is how I want you to look at the church. We are one body. You may not like every member. You may not like every part. But when it is functioning as it should, it's a beautiful thing. When it is functioning poorly, it puts lots of stress and strain everywhere. And then he tells us, so he's continuing with this idea of living sacrifices, and he tells us how you become a living sacrifice. So here's this thing. You need to be a living sacrifice. The way that you live should bring life. And now he's going to tell us how. So in verse 6, he says this, we have different gifts according to the grace given us. If a man's gift is prophesying, let him use it in proportion to his faith. If it is serving, let him serve. If it is teaching, let him teach. If it is encouraging, let him encourage. If it is contributing to the needs of others, let him give generously. If it is leadership, let him govern diligently. If it is showing mercy, let him do it cheerfully. Now, here's the thing. I don't think this is an exhaustive list because Paul gives other lists in other places and he puts some different things in there. He is trying to show us right here that we all have different gifts. And his point is this, that you need to use your gifts and serve. And the way he connects them is he's saying, this is the way that you become a living sacrifice. Your tendency is going to want to be to pull your parts of your life back to yourself. The way that you keep yourself there and keep yourself submitted is you serve. That's how you do it. This is why I care so much for you to take a few seconds and fill this out and give an hour or a couple hours a week to serving as part of this and the things that we're doing here. Because I believe that when you do this, this is how you become a living sacrifice. This is how you become a part of what God is doing. But he says an important thing here. He shows us there are different gifts. We all have different gifts. Now, the real tragedy of what has happened so often in the church is we see one or two people use their gift well, and everyone wants to be like them. It's like, no. If there's only one of you. And so if you're trying to be them, there's no one who can do what you do. And so take your gifts that you have and use them well. And so the question becomes, well, how do I figure out what my gifts are? And there's a really elaborate way to do that, and that's like you take a test and you go through like 10 weeks of counseling sessions, and then you start trying out different stuff. Or there's another way that's just really, really effective, and that's you start doing stuff. I mean, it's shocking, isn't it? You start doing stuff, and you figure out from that what you're good at. Like I can tell you, I have no advanced music degree. I can tell you whether or not you can sing. I mean, if you want to do a little tryout right now, I mean, we could go. It would be perfectly fine. It'd be a little awkward for everyone else if it's not so good. But I mean, it's a matter of when you do things, you know what you're doing well. There's been this, and I'm so glad I don't feel like we have this at our church. But I think for years in churches, there was this idea that if you're a mom with young kids, then you have to serve in the children's ministry. So for us, that's Kid XP. If I'm a mom with young kids, then I have to work in Kid XP. Here's the problem, is there's some moms who only love their children, and they hate other people's kids. Like, right? Like, we've seen these moms. Don't work with the kids if you only love your own children. I beg of you. And we get this weird idea that it's like we feel like we've got to fit this different molds and these different roles. Well, everyone does this, so I have to do that. It's like, no. There's only one of you. You've been uniquely gifted. If you have no idea what those gifts are, start doing stuff to figure it out. But we need you. We need you as part of this because you're the only person who is gifted how you are. And don't try to be someone else. Don't try to live out someone else's gifts. And you'll figure it out over time what yours are. Bethany used to say this about me when it referred to singing. She still says this. I just don't sing as much. And that was his talent doesn't match his talent doesn't match his enthusiasm. Well, that's good. And so that may be where you are, but you've got to start figuring stuff out. You got to start trying stuff out to figure out what that is. And so here's what Paul's done so far, and this is so important, is he says, here's the deal. A living sacrifice. This is what it means to follow Christ. The way that you become a living sacrifice is you serve in the church. You take the gifts that you have been given, and you use them well. You use your gifts. This is how you become a living sacrifice. And then he's going to point it out in two different directions, and he's going to show us what's at stake in terms of what happens when we actually do this. And I've heard this, he's going to give us the small story and then the big story. So if I said it like this, if you asked what happened in World War II, and I said Hitler died, I would be correct, right? Just to be clear, Hitler died. I just want to make sure we're all on the same page of that, because some of us... We got him? Like, yeah, we got him. So that happened. Hitler died. But here's the deal. That is, if I said that, I am correct, but I'm not giving you the whole story of World War II, am I? I'm just giving you a very small story. And so what he does right here is he tells us, so he goes, you need to be a living sacrifice. The way that you do that is you serve. And then he takes it two different directions, and he goes, I'm going to tell you the small story of what happens first, and then I'm going to tell you the big story. So he goes with this, verse 9. He says, love must be sincere. Now I'm just going to read a couple verses because he kind of goes off on the love thing for a while, and then I'll bring it back. So he says, love must be sincere. Hate what is evil. Cling to what is good. Be devoted to one another in brotherly love. Honor one another above yourselves. Never be lacking in zeal, but keep your spiritual fervor, serving the Lord. Be joyful in hope, patient in affliction, faithful in prayer. Share with God's people who are in need. Practice hospitality. So he talks about the love thing, and he goes off for a few more verses, and I'm not going to go through all that. But he says, here's the deal. When you serve, this is what's at stake, not just for your own life of being a living sacrifice, but tangible things in the world. And he says the very first thing is when you serve, people feel loved. People feel loved. Like, if you're one of those parents, or whether you're a parent or not, who actually likes kids, like you don't just say you like kids because it's the socially acceptable thing to be like, oh, I love children. So like if you're one of the people like, I really love children, and when those people get together and they sit down with a group of kids, and the rambunctiousness and craziness and everything that goes with that, and you don't know what all their backgrounds are, you don't know what their home life's like, you don't know the things they're experiencing, what happens is those kids feel loved. And so at first you go, well, what'd I do? Well, I taught a lesson, I sang some songs, I did stuff like that. But what happens in that moment is those children feel loved. What happens when someone greets? When they put on the nice blue polo that I don't have one of, and they stand at the door somewhere, and they say hi and shake someone's hand and smile at them. What happens is people feel loved. And that's no small thing. It's incredibly significant. And so he's saying when you use your gifts well, the gifts that you have, people feel loved. Can I tell you when people don't feel loved? And that's when you try to live out someone else's gifts. Like if I got up here and led worship, I promise you no one would feel loved. You go, why? Why does he hate us? Why is he doing this to us? But it's a matter of when people use the gifts that they have been given, that's the small thing that happens. You go, that's no small thing. I know. But he's pointing this right here. That is the immediate surface level thing that happens. When you serve and use your gifts, people feel loved. In the same way, for the group that comes and they clean the floors and they clean the different parts of our church, what happens as a result of that is people feel loved. Because when you walk in, you go, oh my goodness, someone cared enough to not let there be salt residue build up for months on this floor. They cared enough about me to clean it for me and to make it look nice. And so people feel loved. No matter what your gift is, when you use it, people feel loved. That's the small thing. Now I'm going to skip down, and he's going to tell the large part, and I'm going to have to explain this for just a little bit. So if you go down to verse 21, and this is how he ends it. He says, do not be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good. Now the teaching here is phenomenal. Do not be overcome by evil, but you overcome evil with good. Now here's what's hilarious, is we actually don't live out that second part almost ever. Because what we end up doing is we think that we overcome evil with evil. And so this is how it works. We're in this series 4, which we're saying is our statement that God is for us, which means we are for people. But how do churches usually act? Is we go, okay, there are things as a church that we are against. There are things that we don't believe in. There are things that we think that are wrong. And what happens, there are groups of people and there are individual people who disagree with that, and they think they're right. They think they can live however they want. We believe the Bible instructs us how to live. And so what we do is, as these different groups and as these different beliefs then they attack the church, what's the church's usual response? Well, get out. You can't show your face here. God hates you. Don't you love those? Like there's that billboard, I forget, it's either on 75 or 71, and it's got like the bright red letters, and it's hell is real. Like I have yet to see someone pull over and pray the salvation prayer. Like, well, I saw the sign. I was dicey about it before, but when I saw the sign, I'm like, okay, this matters. Hell is real. Like, what good is that doing? Like, how is that actually accomplishing anything, like, even remotely positive? And so what happens is that as a church, we experience evil coming against us in different ways, and we just lash back with more anger and more hate. And it's almost like we think somewhere along the way that if you, almost like the two negatives equal a positive. Well, they were evil, and so if we're evil, then something good will come out of it. It doesn't work like that. And so he says right here, do not be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good. And so he gives us two options. This is important. You have two options. And throughout this whole frame, he's been talking about how you serve. And so your options are, be overcome by evil, or overcome evil with good. This is almost a little too bold for me to like it, but this is what Paul is saying. You can either be a part of the problem or you can be a part of the solution. There's no in between. You're either a part of overcoming evil or you're being overcome by evil. And there's no in between. That's how it is. But look at what he's really saying in terms of what's happening. when you serve, when you use your gifts, the surface level, the small thing that happens right in that moment is people feel loved. But here's the bigger thing that is actually happening, is you are a part of overcoming the evil in the world. Isn't that incredible? Like, isn't that absolutely phenomenal and something that we don't really talk about that much? But that when you serve, when you use your gifts well for the purpose for which you have been given them, you are a part of overcoming the evil in the world. And so this is what happens. Whenever you sit down with a group of kids and do a lesson and sing some songs and things like that, you know what? They feel loved. And that's good. That's no small thing. But what you're doing is for all the voices and all the opinions and all the things that would sway them and lead them astray and lead them down a different path, you are standing as a guard at the door telling them, this is the path that matters. This is the one that you should go down. And so in that moment, even though what you may think that you're doing is so insignificant and so not a big deal, you are a part of overcoming the evil that would seek to enslave them in their lives. And you're pointing them down the path of truth. It's no small thing. What you do when you greet and you're a part of welcoming people in, if I could just say it like this, we don't need more greeters in that sense. This is what we need. We need people that as people walk in and they have one, like they are just looking for any excuse to give up on God and church because just their friends inviting them and getting them in the door has just got them at the almost limit. And they're like, oh my goodness, if one thing goes wrong, I'm just going to run out of here screaming because this is so new and so awkward and so uncomfortable for me. What we need is we need a smiling, kind face who can let them know through a very, very small action of shaking their hand or something like that, that it is going to be okay. And so we go at the end of the day, what did I do? I held a door and I shook people's hands and I said hi. But what actually happened is you're a part of overcoming the evil in the world. Let me give you a personal example of this. And I've told this story a couple times before. I don't really feel like, this is kind of hard for me to explain, but I'm going to say it in this sense. I have a hard time talking about a different path that I could have gone down, just because, like, if you know me, I don't feel that evil, if that makes sense. Like, if anything, I was going to go down the path of goofy awkwardness. Like, you understand that? Like, I'm not real dangerous. You got me? Okay, you got me. But when I was in 6th grade, I had 3 really close friends, and when we were on spring break, which we did nothing because we were in 6th grade, like we just hung out. But the first night of spring break when we were off, I went over to my friend's house, and they got into his dad's liquor cabinet, and all 3 of them had just got like crazy drunk on vodka, which, to be clear, we all weighed like 110 pounds, so I think it was like that much. Them. And I can remember just hanging out with them and watching them, and there was a part of me that is like, no, I want nothing to do with that, and there was a part of me that was also like, they're hilarious! Like, this looks great! And the next day, my youth pastor, who was a real good friend of mine, he took me out to lunch. And he didn't know what had happened. He didn't know anything that had gone on, so we didn't talk about it. But he like spent $5 and bought me lunch, and we hung out. And the difference that made was massive. Like, I make no bones about it. The difference that made in my life was massive. Because there was someone in that moment who was going, there's a better path. There's a better path for you. And he didn't even understand what was happening. He didn't understand what was at stake. I believe God let him know, even though he didn't really know. But in that moment, $5 and an hour for lunch made a massive difference in my life. And if I look at it, honestly, I could have gone down a different path. But there was someone there who was making sure that they were overcoming evil with good. Even if they didn't understand in that moment that's what was happening, that's what they were doing. In Matthew 5, Jesus, he shares these different metaphors for the church. And one of them that he talks about is light. That God's people, the church, when we come together, we are light. Let me tell you, we've got a room in our house that's kind of dark. It doesn't matter what we do. It's just a dark room. We should probably change the light bulbs. I understand that. That's what you're thinking. Like, change the light bulbs, Kevin. I know. I don't really want to. I'm busy. And so when I go in that room, I take the flashlight feature on my phone and I turn it on. And let me tell you what doesn't happen. I don't walk into the dark room with the flashlight, and like when I walk in, the flashlight does not start quivering, right? Like the flashlight, when I walk in the dark room, it's not, oh, you know how dark it is in here. Like, I don't know why my flashlight talks like that to me in my head. But like, it's not trembling in my hands, being like, I don't think we should be here. It's pretty dark. No, my flashlight is light. And so when I walk in, it makes things light. And I think for so long as a church, we got scared of the dark. That's what kids do. We're grown-ups. Why are we scared of the dark? Why do we see people with their messy, difficult situations and go, ooh, I don't know, it's pretty dark? We're light. Light drives out dark. It's what it does. It doesn't have to be told to do it. It's just what it does. When light comes into darkness, it makes things light. And I think for so long we see difficult situations and things like that, or people who disagree with us or don't believe like us. And what we wanted to do is we want to huddle into a little corner that seems safe and sound with only people who think like us and act like us and look like us and tell each other how right we are for believing the things that we believe. That's not light. That's what it means to be scared. No, we're called to be light. And naturally, light drives out darkness. It doesn't have to think about it. It just does it. And so this is what I want you to do. I want you to take your gifts, the ways that you've been uniquely gifted that I can't even begin to understand. Like, there's things in the church that I am just not allowed to do. There was a church that was in here yesterday while the band was practicing, unannounced, which is, I don't know, it's very brazen of them, but whatever, it was cool. And they came in, and they're looking at buying the building, which I thought was great, because we retrofitted everything, and we thought it'd be perfect for a church. We're moving, which we're pumped about, but they were looking at buying the building. And the one guy, he was just so shocked, because he up to me, and he goes, what's your electric bill? I was like, I don't know. I don't know. We got people who, like that stuff and know that stuff and watch it. And he's looking at me like I was just the biggest fool in the world. He's like, you're the pastor and you don't know the electric bill? I was like, no, I don't. But then I was like, no, you overcome evil with good. So I was like, no, I don't. Jesus loves you. But it was like, I don't know that, because we've got people who are good at that, so they use their gifts in that way. All those knobs and stuff like that back there on that console, they don't let me touch them. None of them. They don't let me touch any of them. And they look fun, but I don't get to touch them because I don't know what happens back there. If I did it, I'd just make the colors look pretty and things like that, and everything would sound and look terrible. But I don't do that because I'm not gifted there. And so that's what we need you to do. We need you to use your gifts, the ways that you're uniquely wired. If you have no idea, we just want you to try some stuff out and see how it goes. And if you go, not here, we'll probably go, yeah, you're right. Let's do something else. But we want to use them as a way of marking you as being a living sacrifice, to help people feel loved and to overcome the evil in the world. Now here's the deal. Honestly, at the end of the day, can you do everything? Nope. But no one can do everything. But everyone can do something. And so we need you to do that something to be a part of overcoming the evil in the world. Let me pray for you. Father, I just want to thank you. In most churches, there's just a few people who care. There's just a few people who are willing to work. But you have blessed us with so many people who give so many hours and so much effort. And I'm just so grateful for it. And so, Lord, I just ask, first of all, for all those who serve, for all those who are part of a different area, help them to know the difference that they're making. Help them to see the impact that they're having, not just the way people feel loved, but the way that in very, very tangible ways they are part of overcoming the evil in the world. Lord, for all of us, I just ask that you give us a desire to be a part of the solution. For some of us, we have been a part of the problem for way, way too long. And yet in our lives, you have given us this incredible, incredible gift that we call the church, which is our way of partnering with lots of people who don't look like us, who don't act like us, but believe in this one thing, that you are the Savior of the world. And we get to be a part of changing people's lives. So thank you. It's in your Son's name, Jesus. I pray. Amen.
Throughout the series, we've given you all the opportunity you can have to be a part of this FOR movement. The first series, we're purchasing a new building, and we need you to help us build that extra seat for those that are unchurched, those 50,889 people out there. Pick up your card out the welcome desk to be able to pledge any amount that you can, small or large. We also need to join a community group. We have Group Link coming up on March 15th. If you're interested in joining that, see a connector outside with the blue iPads. And we just hope we have moved you today to become someone that's going to serve in this church. Fill out your cards, turn them in, put them in the Tom box. Be a part of this church for the FOR movement that we're out there for. We just thank you all so much for joining us here today. We hope you'll join us here again next week, and we just hope you also stay afterwards for the baptism. Thank you, and see you all next week.